4 out of 5 crosswalk buttons in New York City are connected to nothing. And you already know that pressing the button again will not make the light change faster, so why does your hand still reach out for it? The city admitted the truth in 2010, and yet on every corner of Manhattan people step up to those dead tubes and press once, then again, then check the countdown and press a third time. The light will take exactly as long as the light takes. Everyone knows that. So why does the hand reach out anyway? That small reach is not a quirk. It is a window into a machinery that runs your brain all day. Psychologists call it the illusion of control, and that one dead button hides its entire blueprint. The first rigorous proof of that blueprint came from psychologist Ellen Langer in 1975. She ran a lottery inside an office building, with tickets sold for $1. Some buyers were allowed to choose their own ticket from the basket. The rest received a ticket handed to them at random. Before the draw, she asked every buyer a simple question. How much would you sell your ticket back for? The people who had chosen their own ticket demanded around $4. The people who received a ticket at random asked for about $1. Identical odds, identical prize, identical moment in time. The only difference was an act that had zero effect on the probability of winning. Choosing the ticket changed nothing about the ticket. It only changed the owner. And that gap between what a choice does and what a chooser feels is the exact distance your hand travels when it hits a dead crosswalk button a second time. Why would a brain pay $4 for a gesture that buys nothing? Because the brain is a machine for finding causes. It collects pairs of events, one thing followed by another, and it treats repeated pairs as a law of the world. When the pair is something you did and something you noticed, the brain writes the connection down as fact. It does not check whether a cause is possible. It checks whether a cause is useful. Psychologists call this non-contingent reinforcement. Non-contingent means the reward does not depend on your action. The signal changes whether you press or not. The ticket wins whether you chose it or not. But the human mind is not built to process that. It will manufacture a connection rather than accept that the world moved on its own. The cost of a false cause is tiny. The cost of a missed cause in survival terms is enormous. So the brain leans. It assumes agency first and asks questions later. The strongest demonstration that this wiring is older than reason came in 1948. B.F. Skinner placed 8 hungry pigeons inside a box where a pellet of food dropped into a tray every 15 seconds on a fixed schedule, with no connection to whatever the bird was doing. 6 of the 8 pigeons developed elaborate private rituals. 1 turned counterclockwise. 1 pushed its head into the corner. 1 developed a hopping dance that looked like a bow. Skinner called it superstition, and the name stuck. The birds acted as though their twirls and hops controlled a mechanism that was running on a timer. Nothing about their behavior had produced the food, and nothing about the food could be influenced, yet their bodies insisted otherwise. 6 out of 8 birds refused to sit still and accept the free meal. They worked, they invested effort in choreographies that produced nothing. Before you say you would never do that, remember the last time you walked out of a shaky elevator and said, "We made it." The elevator example works because control is the brain's antidote to uncertainty, and uncertainty is expensive. When an outcome is unpredictable and you cannot steer it, your nervous system stays in a low-grade alarm state. It scans the environment, listens for cues, recalculates. That scanning burns energy and produces stress. An action, any action, restructures the situation. It gives the brain a script. I press the button, so now the universe owes me a reply. The script does not need to be logical. It needs to convert open-ended waiting into a sequence with steps. A step you can take is a problem you can face. This is why people whisper to vending machines, tap their card 3 times on the scanner, and tilt the screen of a slot machine. The gesture is not aimed at the machine. It is aimed at the person holding the card, whose anxiety is marked as a job in progress. The waiting continues, but you are no longer just waiting. You are doing. The illusion of control does not live in your thoughts. It lives in your body. Researchers have tested this with dice. People who are asked to roll for a high number throw harder. People who need a low number roll gently, as if muscular effort could bend probability. In careful lab setups, participants who roll the dice themselves are willing to bet more money than participants who bet on a roll made by someone else. Same dice, same odds, different hands. The hand that does the work feels the odds bend. This effect has been replicated so consistently that it has a name in behavioral economics: the control heuristic. Your brain estimates how likely an outcome is partly by reading how much you acted toward it. Put in effort, and the outcome feels more likely. Nobody teaches you this. You experience it as intuition. That is precisely what makes it so hard to dismantle, because intuition does not present itself as a choice. So how far will that intuition bend before it breaks? Does the illusion ever break? Yes, and the breaking point is strange. In 1979, psychologists Lauren Alloy and Lynn Yvonne Abramson built an experiment where people sat with a button and a light. Sometimes pressing the button made the light flash, sometimes it did nothing. Sometimes the light flashed no matter what. Participants had to state how much control they actually had. The surprise was not that healthy people overestimated their control. The surprise was that people who scored mildly depressed did not. The depressed participants gave accurate judgments. The light does what the light does, they said. This result became known as depressive realism, and researchers still argue about it today. But it marks a border. The illusion of control is not a bug in a healthy brain. It is a feature that switches off when the system runs low. Your brain does not hand you accurate reports about control. It hands you useful reports. When you are doing well, that report runs a few points high. Think about what that means for days when you feel flat. The crosswalk button still clicks. The light still changes on its own schedule. But your hand may not bother to reach out, and the quietness of that hand tells you more about your inner state than any questionnaire. The link between mood and control judgments shows up outside the lab too. Gamblers who are winning keep pressing on. Gamblers who are losing stop feeling lucky at the same table, on the same machine with the same odds. The sense of control is not a constant. It is an output of your biology, lowered by exhaustion, raised by caffeine, altered by a small win. That is why a bad night of sleep or an unexpected compliment can change how superstitious you behave. You do not notice the shift because it happens below your thoughts. It is the weather of your nervous system, not a decision you made. The clearest proof that the illusion works in the real world is the buttons themselves. Cities keep them installed on purpose. When New York investigated its own signal system, engineers understood that the disabled buttons were a convenient lie with a measurable benefit. Pedestrians who believe they have pressed a button wait more calmly. They check the countdown less often, they fidget less, they cross more peacefully. In studies of perceived wait time, people who pressed a button reported that they waited significantly less time than people who did not press, even when the actual interval was identical and the button was a placebo. The button is not for the traffic light. The button is for the pedestrian. The city discovered that a meaningless ritual could stabilize a crowd, so they left the dead buttons in place, knowing the deception was harmless. The irony is that the ritual works better than the truth. At this point, the illusion stops being charming and becomes expensive. Casinos found it decades ago, and they have refined it into an engineering discipline. The slot machine near miss is the purest example. 2 matching symbols, then a third that stops just short of the line. You did not lose. You almost won. Brain imaging shows that a near miss activates reward regions similar to those of an actual win, and it increases the urge to keep playing. Some machines are programmed to produce near misses at rates far above chance. The player leaves believing they were unlucky, not that the machine designed their luck. The next spin feels like an attempt to finish something. That is not a game. That is a control illusion manufactured by engineers who know exactly which neural buttons to press, and who have read the same research you are reading right now. Finance is the quiet cousin of the casino. Day traders who can click a buy button themselves feel more control over their returns than people who put money into an index fund and leave it alone. They trade more, they feel more confident, and on average they end up worse off. The mechanism is identical to the crosswalk button. The click feels like influence, so the click becomes a reward. Studies of retirement investors show that the more often people check their accounts, the worse their performance, because every check creates an opportunity to act on an illusion. You end up paying a real fee for a feeling that never reaches the outcome. The same machinery inflates the sense that a single post changed a debate, or that a second lottery ticket doubles your control over a game with 100 million outcomes. The stakes differ. The wiring does not. There is a price in the other direction, too. If the brain decides control is gone, it stops trying altogether. Martin Seligman demonstrated this in the 1960s. He gave dogs electric shocks they could not escape. Later, he moved them into a box with a low barrier where a jump would end the shock. Most of the dogs did not jump. They lay down and accepted the shocks. They had learned that action does not matter. Seligman called it learned helplessness, and the finding reshaped psychology. But look at the healthy comparison. An animal that has never tasted helplessness will act like a control enthusiast, pressing levers, testing walls, scraping the floor. The illusion of control, for all its absurdity, is the engine of persistence. It is the opposite of giving up. A brain that overestimates its own power will run more experiments and bump into more real causes by accident. It will learn more because it thinks learning works. So the crosswalk button is not a lie you tell yourself. It is a working part of a mind designed to lean into outcomes. The 4 out of 5 fake buttons in New York are not a failure of engineering. They are a mirror held up to your own infrastructure. You will press dead buttons for the rest of your life. You will whisper to machines that do not listen, choose lottery numbers that do not care, and roll dice with the force of your wishes behind them. None of this makes you foolish. It makes you human. The real question is not whether you can stop. It is which buttons you keep pressing on purpose, with full knowledge, and which ones you finally learn to press exactly once, knowing that the wait was the only thing you were ever trying to control. Choose the ones that cost nothing and steady your hands. Throw your effort at the ones that move actual outcomes. Here is what the number hides in the end. 4 out of 5 buttons do nothing, and yet every day they do something real and measurable to the people who press them. The light changes on its own schedule, but a person who pressed the button leaves the intersection slightly more at ease than the person who stood and watched. That is not a glitch. It is the whole point. Your mind was never built to be accurate about control. It was built to keep you in the game, pressing forward, trying again. The cost of that design is a hand reaching for a dead button on a street corner. The benefit is every invention, every risk, every small act of persistence that would never have happened if the brain had insisted on certainty before acting. So press the button. Press it as if it mattered. The light will change when the light changes. But the one thing that button has always controlled, quietly and completely, is the person doing the pressing.